All right, so TikTok, huh? I mean, everyone's been talking about it. But things have gotten a little bit crazy recently, wouldn't you say? With this whole 20-hour blackout thing
Yeah.
and all these presidential tweets, it's really been something else.
Yeah, it's definitely been a wild ride. And, what's so interesting to me is that we're seeing all these different things collide, like
Yeah.
cybersecurity concerns, international relations, the power of social media. It's not just about an app, It really gets you thinking about, like, who controls all this data, who gets to make the rules online, and what happens when, one single tweet can kind of just blow everything up.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it really makes you think, where do we even draw the lines anymore?
Yeah.
Between like politics and business and tech. It's all just kind of blurring together, isn't it?
Totally. And I think to understand this whole thing, we kind of have to go back to that 20-hour blackout.
Right, right.
I mean, for most American users, TikTok just vanished.
It's like, poof, gone.
And millions of people were suddenly locked out. It really showed us just how dependent we've all become on these platforms, don't you think?
For sure. I mean, one minute you're scrolling through dance challenges,
Yeah.
and the next minute it's like the internet's holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next.
Right. Exactly.
But this wasn't just some random glitch, right? This was intentional.
Absolutely. This was a direct result of the U.S. government trying to tackle those cybersecurity concerns around TikTok. I've been pushing for this sell-off, hoping to get an American company to take over TikTok's U.S. operations.
Okay, yeah.
But then President-elect Trump enters the picture, and things get a whole lot more complicated.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty unusual, isn't it, to have a president-elect step in like this, even before taking office?
Yeah, it's definitely not something you see every day.
And then he goes and tweets, let me see if I can find it. I'm asking companies not to let TikTok stay dark. I will issue an executive order on Monday to extend the period of time before the law's prohibitions take effect, so that we can make a deal to protect our national security. The order will also confirm that there will be no liability for any company that helped keep TikTok from going dark before my order. I mean, wow.
It's pretty unprecedented. You'd have to go back to the early days of radio, like way back, to the fights over broadcast licenses to find this kind of direct intervention in communications tech.
Wow. And, it's one thing to step in like that, but then he goes and promises to protect companies from legal issues.
Right.
Like, that just adds a whole other layer to this whole mess.
It really does.
So you've got this legal battle brewing, but then suddenly it's not just about security anymore. Trump starts talking about it like it's a business deal. He wants a U.S. company to own like half of TikTok.
It's a really interesting shift because he's not just focused on mitigating risk. He's talking about profit, about American companies owning this valuable asset.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, is this really about national security? Or is it about, getting a piece of a really profitable pie?
Yeah, I see what you mean. And then, of course, you've got all the tech companies stuck in the middle of all this, trying to figure out what to do.
Right.
Like Apple and Google, they decided to play it safe.
They did. They refused to host the app, citing the Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act.
Right, that act.
Yeah, that's a really important one.
Because it lays out some pretty serious penalties.
Huge fines for companies that distribute apps that are deemed, a national security risk. We're talking thousands of dollars per user.
Wow.
And when you're dealing with companies that have millions of users, that adds up really, really quickly.
Yeah, for sure. But then you've got Oracle, who actually stores TikTok's data.
Yeah.
And they decided to side with Trump and keep the app running. I mean, what do you make of that?
It's a bit of a gamble, They might be banking on a close relationship with the new administration. Or maybe they see this as a chance to kind of expand their role within TikTok. But they're definitely taking a risk, hoping that Trump can actually deliver on that promise of legal protection.
Right. So we've got this weird split, this tension between being cautious and trying to seize an opportunity. And in the middle of it all are millions of TikTok users just wondering what's going to happen to their favorite app.
Exactly. And right now, existing users can still access TikTok, but new downloads are blocked.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of a fragile limbo,
Yeah.
Legal battles are probably on the horizon. And the final outcome is anyone's guess.
Yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
We will. But it really raises the question, doesn't it? What happens to an app, to a community, when it becomes a pawn in this much larger game of power?
That's a great question. I guess we'll have to explore that a bit more. But first, we got to take a quick break. So we'll be right back after this. So TikTok is kind of in this weird holding pattern, accessible, but also kind of frozen in time. New users are blocked, and everyone's just waiting to see, if Trump can actually make this happen, like, can he really just go around Congress and basically force this ownership deal?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, it's a huge legal gamble. A lot of experts think that his executive order, even if he does issue it, it might not hold up. Congress passed that sell-off bill for a reason, and it's unlikely they're just going to let the president,
Yeah.
completely override their decision.
Yeah, I mean, it just feels like a pretty dangerous precedent to set, doesn't it? Like, what's stopping future presidents from just
Actually,
bypassing Congress whenever they feel like?
exactly. That's the concern. This could really upset the balance of power,
Yeah.
and give the executive branch way too much control over things like national security and economic policy. We could even be looking at a potential constitutional crisis.
Wow, it's pretty heavy stuff. And I mean, where does all this leave TikTok? Imagine you're a developer trying to work on new features, or you're a creator who's basically built your career on this platform. The future must feel incredibly uncertain.
Yeah, it's a nightmare scenario for them. All this uncertainty makes it impossible to plan, to innovate, to invest in the future of the app. Creators are worried that their audience is going to disappear overnight, that their income is just going to dry up. And, it's easy to forget that there's a real human cost to all of this political maneuvering.
Right, right. And it's not just creators who are affected. For users, this isn't just about losing access to funny videos, it's about data privacy. Like, if a US company takes over, does that actually make our data safer? Or are we just shifting control from one entity to another?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something we need to be talking about. Because American ownership doesn't automatically equal better security. We need to look beyond the headlines and really examine the specific data practices and the policies that are going to be put in place.
It's kind of like those Made in America labels,
Yeah.
Just because something's made here doesn't necessarily mean it's better or more ethical. We really have to dig deeper.
Exactly. And this is where the conversation needs to move beyond the political rhetoric and into a more nuanced discussion about data governance. Like, what kind of regulations are we going to put in place? Who's going to have access to this data? How do we ensure transparency and accountability?
Yeah, it feels like this whole TikTok thing is really exposing the flaws in our approach to data privacy. Like, we're always reacting, scrambling to fix problems after they happen, instead of being proactive and putting user rights first.
I agree. We need clear guidelines for data protection.
Absolutely.
And it's important to remember this isn't just a domestic issue. This has global implications.
Oh, right.
TikTok is a Chinese company operating all over the world, and what the U.S. government does could really strain relations with China.
Right.
We could even see retaliatory measures.
Like, imagine if China suddenly restricted access to Facebook or Google within their borders.
Exactly. It would send shockwaves through the entire tech industry.
For sure.
This could trigger all sorts of protectionist policies and lead to a much more fragmented internet, where different countries are imposing their own rules and regulations.
So instead of a global internet, we end up with like a bunch of mini internets.
Yeah, essentially, we could see the rise of these digital borders, hindering the free flow of information, stifling innovation.
Wow. That's kind of a scary thought. I mean, the internet was supposed to be this force for globalization,
Yeah,
for connection.
it was.
But now, it feels like it can become a tool for division and control.
It's a real possibility.
And this whole idea of an open and interconnected internet,
It's at stake.
it really is.
And the TikTok case is a perfect example of this struggle,
Yeah.
It highlights the tension between national interests and global values, between the desire for security and the need for openness.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So it feels like we're at a crossroads, and the choices we make now are going to have a lasting impact on the future of the internet. So I guess the question is, what can we do about it? Like, as individuals, how can we make our voices heard?
Well, I think it starts with awareness, paying attention to the policies that are being debated, the actions of these tech companies, and understanding what it all means for our digital rights.
So it's not enough to just consume information.
No, we need to be active participants in shaping the digital world.
Right. Like, don't just blindly click agree
Yeah.
on those terms of service agreement.
Exactly.
Think about who's collecting your data and how it's being used.
Right.
Support organizations that are fighting for digital rights and privacy.
Yeah, that's important. And talk about these issues with your friends, your family, your community. The more we understand the challenges, the better equipped we'll be to find solutions.
Yeah, we can't just sit back and wait for someone else to fix it.
No, we can't.
The future of the internet is something we have to create together.
It's a call to action for all of us. We need to demand transparency, hold power accountable, and fight for a digital world that reflects our values
It's been a wild ride, hasn't it? Talking about data, security, the future of the internet, it's a lot to take in. But I think one thing's for sure, this whole TikTok thing has really opened up a can of worms about who's really in control online.
Oh, absolutely, Anne. It's a power struggle, unlike anything we've seen before. Governments are starting to realize just how much influence these tech companies have, and they're not afraid to use their power.
Right, and it feels like this is just the tip of the iceberg. What happens with TikTok could set the stage for how governments and tech companies interact all over the world.
Yeah, think about it. What if every country starts dictating what apps their citizens can use, what information they can access? You'd end up with a completely fragmented internet, digital walls instead of physical borders.
Right, it's like the opposite of what the internet was supposed to be.
Exactly. And it raises all sorts of questions about censorship, about innovation, about the very freedom that the internet was supposed to represent.
It feels like the Wild West days of the internet are over. Like we're entering a new era
Yeah.
where the stakes are higher, the rules are unclear, and the consequences are huge.
The whole new ball game.
It really is. And
Yes.
the big question is, what role do we as users play in all of this? Do we just sit back and let governments and corporations control our digital lives?
I don't think so. We have a responsibility to stay informed, to engage in these conversations, to demand better. We need to think critically about the information we consume, the platforms we use, the data we share.
Right, like, don't just blindly agree to those terms of service agreements. Actually take the time to understand who's collecting your data and how it's being used.
Exactly.
Support organizations that are fighting for digital rights and privacy.
Yes, that's so important.
We need to hold those in power accountable.
Okay.
Whether it's governments overreaching or tech companies prioritizing profit over privacy.
This isn't about being anti-technology or anti-government. It's about finding that balance, harnessing the power of the internet while still protecting individual rights and creating a truly open and global digital society.
I think this whole TikTok situation has been a wake-up call for all of us. It's shown us that the future of the internet isn't set in stone. It's something we all shape with our choices, our actions, our voices.
The internet is an incredibly powerful tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. It's up to us to decide what kind of future we want to build.
Well said. It's been an incredible deep dive into the TikTok saga and what it reveals about the forces at play in our digital world. I hope you found it insightful and that it's made you think a little bit more critically about your own digital life.
The future is still being written, and we all have a part to play in shaping it. Stay informed, stay engaged. And remember, at its core, the internet is about connection, about sharing, about empowering individuals. Let's work together to make sure it stays that way.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll be back soon with more explorations of the fascinating and ever-changing world of tech. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay connected.